So it's another day, back out here wrenching in the shop again. We're getting right back to it on this S13. I figured I'm gonna go ahead and pick up where we left off and get this intercooler kit completely installed and finished up so we can move on to the next thing. Let me show you guys where I'm at with that right now. So we got the hot pipe in, and I went ahead and marked the general area where I want the blow-off valve. I had to do a little work on the blow-off valve flange to sort of really get it to fit on there snug. So I kind of marked out the general area of where I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and get a hole saw and get a general cut done of this area. I can trim it out the rest of the way once I'm done welding it up. So yeah, let's go ahead and get this thing over to the vise and get a hole saw on it. Get this thing drilled out. All right, looks pretty good. I'm gonna clean this up with a file. Go ahead and get that Sharpie off of there and clean the aluminum a little bit more. Get this thing tacked on and start welding it up. So as you guys can probably tell, I still have a lot to learn, and you know, I'm getting better at this. But all in all, I'd say most of this is fairly acceptable. It got a little sloppy there because it was just really tight. I tried to stick out the tungsten and increase the gas flow, and it just didn't turn out the way I anticipated it would. But most of it turned out acceptable in my mind. So yeah, we got this done. It should do. The next thing I have to weld is this port, which was intended for the factory blow-off valve. I basically just need to like cap it off, and I couldn't really find a cap, so, and it's not something that'll ever be used, so we might as well just seal it. Put this little piece of aluminum on there, weld it shut, and thankfully this isn't really visible. It'll be underneath the fender. So yeah, let's go ahead and cap this off and get this intercooler kit assembled. The intercooler kit is now fully installed. Got the hot pipe back in and bolted up the blow-off valve. Positioning is looking pretty good. And the port that we talked about earlier is now capped off. If I can get you in there. Yep. So everything is sealed up. Everything is positioned nicely. I'm still gonna have to put some trim on this hole to sort of match that side. It's no big deal. I'm gonna have to pull off this hot pipe soon to sort of reroute some turbo lines and stuff. But for now, the intercooler kit is pretty much done. So the next thing I wanna do is go ahead and get this alternator in. This is a KA alternator, so we went ahead and put an SR pulley on it. We were missing some hardware, but I actually went to Ace Hardware, and they sell some really nice yellow zinc coated hardware. So that was a pleasant little surprise to find that stuff, and got a new bolt for the alternator, and we should be able to drop it right in. Once the alternator's in, I'll be good to go ahead and start wiring this thing up. Some of the hardware I got includes hardware for the fuel rail, so I think that yellow zinc hardware is gonna look really good up top. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and knock this out, and we'll see if we can't get this thing fired today. I've actually made some really good progress so far. Got the fuel rail mounted up, got most of the wiring done. Pretty much everything is connected. There's a few little odds and ends. There always is a couple plugs that never really find a home. But for one thing, I got the wiper motor mounted up. Fresh hardware there. Fresh hardware on the fuel rail. all the injector plugs are good, and the wiring through the intake manifold. I am sort of missing a little conversion harness for the mass airflow sensor, but that should be ordered pretty easily. Got the alternator in. And let's see, there's a few other odds and ends. What else did I do? Got the lower wiring harness in, so we've actually got battery terminals now, which is good to see. Unfortunately, the plugs for the transmission, I believe this is a KA transmission, and the plugs were never swapped out, but I should be able to order the proper plugs off Wiring Specialties and get that all sorted out. The next thing I need to tackle is the coil packs. So when this came in, it actually had the factory coil pack set up. These work, but they often go bad, and you know, they're an old school style coil pack that uses an igniter chip. So the performance isn't the best on them. So we're gonna be doing a pretty basic little upgrade here. We've got some VQ35DE coil packs. There are better options than this, but if you're not making a tremendous amount of power, these actually work great. They're a smart coil. We're gonna be deleting the igniter chip using this patch harness here. And we're gonna be repinning the factory harness to accept these coils. It's pretty simple. There's just two wires that I need to depin and basically swap around. So yeah, it's a nice little overview of a good little mod. These coil packs are much more accessible than the factory S13SR ones. And like I said, they do perform considerably better. The next step up from these would be R35 coils, but they are pretty pricey. But these will work just fine for our setup. So, yep, that's what I'm gonna do right now is deepen that harness, probably relume it, make it look a little nicer, get the fresh coil packs in. I'm pretty sure everything is done as far as wiring. I got the ECU in the car, got the body harness hooked up. I'm gonna throw a belt on this alternator. I'm gonna put the pulley on temporarily for now. I still need to put the radiator and fan shroud and clutch fan and all that in, but just for first start, I should be good to throw the belt on the alternator and fire it up. Still need to put some fresh oil in here and build oil pressure. So we are getting really close to a first start though, and I'm fairly excited about this. Since I can't fire it up tonight, I'm gonna go ahead and move right along to something else. I think I'm gonna go ahead and drop in the radiator. I've got the coil rad right here, so I'm gonna pull that out. We also have a factory fan shroud, and we also have a brand new factory clutch fan. So these things are actually really expensive to get from Nissan, and they have to be for the SR. The KA one does not work. So stoked to have that. We also are gonna be using a GK Tech fan. Kind of see it down there. So really nice setup. E-fans are good. This is probably just as good, and I like the OEM look, so I'm stoked he decided to go this route. So basically, we're gonna throw the radiator in, hook up the hoses, get the clutch fan on, and get the shroud in. So yeah, let's go ahead and knock it out. So the clutch fan, fan shroud, and the belt is in permanently, as well as the radiator. We got some brand new brackets up top here. So it's looking pretty good, man. It's coming together. A few other little things. Our alternator fuse was popped, so we got some fresh ones. It's really nice. And yeah, this thing is really coming together up top. We also got the coil pack secured. They're now officially installed. Got some spark plugs in there as well. Still waiting on a battery for this. So until then, we can't really fire it up still. But I'm gonna move on to the next thing on this project, which is pulling this turbo. Basically, I noticed that these turbo lines were installed not really in the best way possible, but I think I can do a lot better. So, and also the flange bolts, the like square T2 flange, they don't have the locking tabs on them, and that's pretty much a must for these. Taking a closer look, it looks like they did use layered gaskets. There's fresh hardware in there, which is nice to see. Layered gasket on the T2 flange as well. And we also have a layered gasket on the downpipe, which is also really nice to see. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and pop off this charge pipe, get the turbo out, get those locking tabs on it, clean up what I can, inspect the turbo, make sure it's healthy, and start getting it all back together so the hot side will be ready to go. The turbo is officially pulled out. Let me go ahead and show you guys what I'm doing to this thing. So one of the main reasons I pulled this is because the turbo lines weren't exactly routed correctly. It was rubbing up against the wastegate actuator arm here. So that was just a recipe for disaster. Basically the line was backwards. So I flipped it around, got some heat protection on both of these lines. This one is the more important one because it wraps around and basically gets real close to the manifold here. So, and of course it's close to the hot side here as well. So reliability is what's most important to me. I want to make sure that this car doesn't come back for any stupid small reasons. And another one of those things that, speaking of reliability, I got these tabs on here. So it had some locking washers on there, which, you know, just doesn't do really. These are a Nissan tab, and essentially what happens is it bends and really holds the nut in place. For any of you guys that have been messing around with SRs for a while, you'll know that these bolts come loose all the time. So again, it's more just preventative stuff, making sure this car gets down the road and doesn't fall apart. So we got the lines right, we got the heat wrap on there, we got the locking tabs in place. I also went ahead and threw on a fresh O2 sensor, got the studs in the downpipe or a turbo elbow, and went ahead and checked the turbo. So there's no play, there's no contact with the housing. This is an old logo ISR turbo. So it's definitely been around for a while. Hopefully it lasts. I honestly prefer to have a Garrett turbo on here, but it is what it is. I mean, this will be good enough for now. When it's time to upgrade, we can go with something a little bit more reliable. But I also went ahead and got a hose clamp on this oil return as well. So yeah, this turbo should be good to go for a while now. All right, so one final look at the turbo setup, fully assembled. I'm still waiting to put the charge pipe back in because I still have to install like the intake and a few other small things, but yeah, it's all back together. It's all in there. The lines are routed in a much better way than they were. So we shouldn't have any leaking. We shouldn't have any melted lines, and the wastegate actuator should have plenty of room to do its thing. So yeah, the hot side is good. Should be fairly reliable as long as the turbo lasts. Moving right along, the next thing we got to do is pull this transmission. So to start off with, I'm just gonna pull this shifter apart, get underneath, and drop this trans out. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and tackle this, and once I get the trans out, I'll go ahead and get back with you guys and show you what the clutch assembly is looking like. So the transmission is pulled out. Just going through everything, inspecting it, and this throwout bearing seems to be pretty much brand new. Just like everything else so far, it looks like it's got 0 miles on it. So I went ahead and pulled it apart and got some fresh grease on it. Made sure everything was lined up properly. So the main reason why I pulled this was to replace the rear main. So I got the old one out, threw the new one in, cleaned up the area a little bit. So we shouldn't have any more leaks from this rear main. It should be good to go. Taking a look at the clutch assembly, the pressure plate and the disc, pretty much they have 0 miles on them. They look like they've never been spun up, so that's really good. The flywheel was slightly used, but probably not on this vehicle. So they just had a little bit of surface rust from sitting, so I got in there with a sander and cleaned up the surfaces a little bit. Should be good to go. We got our fresh slave cylinder, and yeah, I should be good to go ahead and start throwing all this back together, and then I can move on to stuff like the exhaust and the drive shaft, and yeah, just finishing touches on this car at the moment. We're getting really close. Once I get this transmission in, I may go ahead and try to fire it up and see if it runs, and then move on from there. So yeah, let's go ahead and throw this back together and get on it. So here's a cool little tech tip. For any of you guys that follow me on Instagram, you already know about this. Basically, you can take a transmission bolt and a pressure plate bolt, put a wrench in place, and it allows you to basically hold the assembly in place while you get everything down to the proper torque spec. And I don't care what you say, if you guys don't torque your flywheel, I don't know, y'all are funny. The transmission is back in place. I went ahead and threw in the new master cylinder and slave and got that all bled out. So the clutch is feeling really good. I went ahead and got the new battery in. I got to do a little bit of modification here to really help it fit in there correctly. But yeah, so I'm good to go ahead and try to start this thing. I managed to get it to turn over last time I was working on it. But there's a couple issues. The interlock relay is bad, and the ignition switch is actually bad as well. It's not a huge deal. I can bypass it for now, sort of using like a piece of jumper wire here and just bridging the starter with a screwdriver or wire or something. But I did get it to spin over, and it did not. So it's diag time. I got to figure out why this thing isn't firing. I like to start with fuel. So I'm going to start by making sure these fuel lines are in the correct order, basically. If these two are flipped, it just won't run. So I'm going to do that by disconnecting the fuel line going to the filter, and I'm going to prime the pump and see if we get fuel out of this line. This line should be sending fuel to the rail. This is the return. So if I have to swap them around, that'll be a pretty good sign. That's a pretty common mistake, because you know it's hard to really differentiate the lines from the hard lines down there. And if the fuel checks out, then I'm going to move on to spark, and I'm going to pull one of these coil packs basically and just check for spark. If we have fuel and we have spark, the next thing I move on to is making sure the injectors are actually firing and delivering the fuel into the engine. So yeah, I'm gonna go through the basics and see if we can't get this thing to start up. It is cranking really good and it sounds really healthy. So yeah, I think it's probably just gonna be a small issue and we'll be good to go. So the last place I left off, I was trying to figure out why this SR20 wouldn't start. Long story short, after going through a bunch of diag, I eventually found that one of the fuel lines was clogged, specifically the metal hard line that goes right here. So I got the thing fired, and unfortunately, after about 10 minutes of running and bleeding out the coolant system, we developed a noise in the bottom end. So it's incredibly unlucky. I'm thinking it's a piston or a ring or something along those lines. Yeah, it doesn't sound good, but it does still rotate. So, you know, these things happen. It's incredibly unfortunate. The basic story behind the engine was that it was rebuilt 7 years ago or around that time frame and was never started up. So the customer was always aware that there was a risk involved with this. I knew going into it, this could be a potential problem. And it sounded really good for the little bit of time it was alive, and then it just conked out. So it's an incredibly unlucky situation. It's not how I wanted to end this video, and it really bums me out because these cars are my favorite, you know, and I hate to see it when these engines go. So, but they are getting really old, and it's becoming more and more commonplace these days. So anyways, it seems like the plan is now, you know, he's not ready to give up on the car, which is awesome. So we're considering options, we're considering alternative swaps, and we're also talking about sending the block in the head to a machine shop. I'm trying to get quotes from different machine shops and find a good shop that I can send it to. So I don't think that's the end of the line for this car, at least I hope not. It's not the way I wanted to end this video, but yeah, there's really no other way to go about it. This SR20 met a tragic end, so maybe we can save it. Maybe we can end up doing something really cool and unique as an alternative swap. Who knows? I guess you'll just have to stay tuned to find out. But yeah, make sure you guys subscribe. Make sure you stay up to date on the content. And hopefully the next video will be a little more exciting for you guys. Or at least have a better ending. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.